Welcome to the Silicon Slopes Conversations. We're here with Davis Smith, CEO of Cotopaxi.
Thank you.
Oh, wait.
Glad to be here.
Sorry, I got
Glad
that
to be
wrong.
here. Yeah.
Just kidding. Davis Bell, CEO of Canopy. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good, thank you. There's a funny LinkedIn exchange on that, so
Yeah,
I wasn't being rude.
Twice a week, someone asks me if I'm Davis Smith, so I'm just going to start going with it.
Yeah, well, you're both cool.
Yeah, well, one of us is a little cooler than the other, but I'm trying.
Yeah, very cool. All right, well, thank you for taking the time to be here today, and thank you guys all for coming. As you know, there will be a couple of questions at the end, so if we don't cover what you'd like to ask, then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end there. All right, so tell us a little bit about Canopy, and then we'll jump in after that.
Yeah, so Canopy is, and you tell me where, just wherever? Okay, people, give the people what they want. So Canopy is a software company. We're based in Draper and been around since 2014. And our primary product and business is making practice management software for accounting firms. So CPA firms use our software to run their business effectively.
And it's tax season right now, right?
It's starting to be tax season, which is a really depressing time at Canopy because it means our software gets used a lot, which is great, but it means that no one will return our phone calls when we're trying to sell them stuff. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And then on April 16th,
April 16th, we all realize that we're not actually going out of business and that people want to buy our stuff, and our AEs kind of start to enliven and things start getting going again. Although usually that's when accountants take vacation, so it takes a couple weeks and things thaw out and get going again.
Very cool. And it's a big market, right? There's a lot of people crunching numbers and doing taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I should know the number. I think there's like 1.4 million CPAs or accounting and tax professionals. They're not all CPAs, but just in the U.S. So there's tons and tons of people and lots of really big companies that do what we do that we're trying to displace.
Very cool. Yeah, it's kind of funny that there's 1.4 million people that consciously decided they wanted to do taxes.
We love accountants, obviously. And yeah, I mean, there's some people that just personality type, it's what they're built for. They love numbers and they love kind of, working with their clients and helping them not go to jail. So
yeah, very good. All right, so you guys recently raised a Series BB, correct?
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of backstory on that. What does BB mean, and how does it relate to kind of what you guys have gone through the last couple of years?
Sure. So it's kind of funny. The funding round naming system is totally made up, and I don't know if people realize that, but it is completely made up. And there's some broad industry kind of guidelines about how big of a company you would be if you were raising a seed or an A or a B. And so, we've tried to kind of follow that to some degree, but it's called a BB because Canopy had done a B back in the day. And so when I came on, we kind of reset things, right? And so we did an AA and then a BB, and we called it a B because the stage of the company and the size of the round more or less kind of corresponded to what you would see for a B. So as far as what it means for the company, I mean, it's huge. It kind of, comes at the tail end of, 2.5 years since I've kind of been there with a new team, and represents, I think, the culmination of all those efforts of getting us where we want to go. So it's huge and fantastic and amazing for us. We're super stoked.
Yeah, congrats on that. And yeah, you were on the podcast a couple of weeks, I believe, after you took the role.
You never called me again. I thought we did great, and then I never heard from you again.
You did do great,
yeah.
But I knew you were busy. And
I thought we had something, but yeah,
we do. So there was some trials and tribulations, and you know what you're getting into, right?
Yeah.
what systems and processes did you place within the company, and then also kind of just in your own mind of how you were going to do this from a culture perspective, from a business perspective, investor perspective, partner perspective? How did you kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time?
Well, I think, so just to give a little backstory, so as I mentioned, Canopy was founded in 2014, and for a while there was raising a lot of money and everything was up and to the right, and then kind of hit some snags, right? And that resulted in a really tough year in 2019 that resulted in about 2/3 of the company getting laid off, and it was public and in the press, and it was just a really hard time. And so I kind of came on at the very tail end of that, right? At a point where, we had, I think at our peak we were about 300 people, and by that point it was about 100 people, and I kind of walked in the door a week or two after that second layoff, which was just a really hard time, as you can imagine. And so I think, looking at it, and it is an elephant, right? You're sort of like, all right, I've got some employees who I'm new to them, they don't know me, and they're also, feeling bummed, right? And they're sad, and they've seen a bunch of their colleagues, get let go, and they're wondering, is this a real business? Is it going to survive? Am I an idiot for staying here? And so and then there's this strategic question around, like, there were a couple different products in the mix, and what's the right one that's going to kind of lead you to the promised land? And then there's fundraising stuff, right? Because most companies here burn cash, right? Venture-backed companies, and we were no exception. And had money in the bank, but you burn, and it's not going to last forever. So I think those were really kind of the three main things. And I will say the most fortunate thing was there was a super talented team in place that I didn't come in and clean house and bring in a bunch of people. Like, I was kind of brought in, and already we had super talented people at the executive level and management level and individual contributor level. So, they knew a lot of stuff that I didn't. So I would say the biggest thing probably was I went in and just listened a lot, because I just wasn't expert on it, right? And many of them were. But so I thought about really those three buckets, right? Like strategy, what's the right product? What market are we going after? How do we go raise money at some point? And then first and foremost, how do we get these employees believing in what we're telling them and excited about what they're doing? And so that was probably where I put my focus first. I met with every single employee, a lot of emotion and even some anger about what had happened and how things were going, and lots of straight up questions of like, why on earth should I stay here? And you just get through it, right? And I think the thing that I promised was just total transparency. Like, if good, bad, and ugly, like, I'm going to come in and learn what's going on, and I'm going to tell all of you that. Like, I'm not just telling my board, I'm not just telling you my executive team. I'm going to do an assessment in the first couple of weeks, and I'm going to come to you guys, and I'm going to say, this is what's great, and this is what's got to change, and these are the risks. And I did that within, I can't remember, 30 days or something. And, I think it was a little bracing for people to be like, oh, wow, like, to hear from your CEO, like, these are, if we don't fix these, they'll kill us, because normally it's kind of the happy, shiny dance. But, it had the effect of earning their trust at a minimum. And we did have kind of a lot of attrition. Like, people were like, nah, like, either, I don't know, they didn't like me, or they'd just been through too much or didn't believe, but they bailed. But the core, people, like, the leadership, management, and core individual contributors, they're all still around, and they bought in. So then I listened mostly on the strategy, because I was the new guy, and I had never worked in the segment before. And then funding was where I started kind of pitching in, but that took a while to figure out.
Yeah, not an easy job, but it sounds like you kind of went the old-fashioned way and just communicated and listened for a while. So after that 30 days, what was the picture in your mind as to next steps as it relates to company culture? You'd listened, you'd communicated. What do you do then?
So relates to culture, I will say Canopy, I think, had a really great culture in most ways when I showed up. Like, there's tons of respect and empathy. It was a good place to work, right? There was no like toxic jerks around. Like it was, none of that. So that was a really great thing to kind of inherit. I think where I wanted to really double down was on clarity around like, this is what we're going to do. This is, and transparency around like, this is the good, bad, and the ugly. Like, and I'm a transparent person by my nature, but I think I was probably like over the top, just given the context, right? And I just felt like people needed that, right? And so one of the big things we did pretty early on, I can't remember exactly when, but we did new values, right? They had a set of values, and we completely reset them. We picked 3. And we made a big deal out of it. Like we didn't want them to be just stuff that was written on a wall on a stupid poster somewhere, but we wanted them to be meaningful. We wanted people to know what they were, live by them, embody them. And then we did, we anchor our recognition to that, and, we talk about them a lot. So I think from a cultural perspective, it was just a lot about creating new values, getting people on board with those, and then just over the top transparency. Like, this is the bad stuff that happened this month. This is the good stuff that happened, but there was bad stuff that happened. And these are the risks, and, we're getting kicked in the teeth over here. And, people are grown-ups, and they like that. People are always nervous to do it, but they like it, and they, responded well to it.
And if that was only the main job of a CEO, you'd probably be happy, but you also have to worry about like product,
sure,
and the board,
yeah,
and investors. So after the company culture, listening, where did you then kind of start to focus your efforts?
Well, so it was kind of a dual track with the culture, getting people bought in. When I came in, we did an employee NPS survey, which I'm a huge believer in that measure for employees and not just customers. And it was a 1, right? Like it was really, really low. And so we wanted a benchmark, and we set to work getting that up, right? And that just ticked up. It's now 79, which we're super proud of, and I think is very high. But the second track was the strategy question, because Canopy had effectively 3 different products, and one was like the super high investment product called tax preparation. And the idea there was, hey, we're going to build this tax preparation in the cloud product, which is an awesome idea and is still dominated by these really old school incumbents. It's on-prem software, but it's really hard to build, because you got to build software, which is tough, but then you've got to build the US tax code in software logic. So we had I think 70 or so full-time accountants working at Canopy on this product, and we just ultimately concluded we can't do that right now. As great of an idea as it's just too expensive. So then we had this other product, which is actually where most of our customers were, which helped people resolve kind of issues with the IRS, and that was just an okay business. It had some challenges, frankly, and churn and those kinds of things, but in being out in the marketplace for 5 or so years, we learned about this practice management opportunity, which, we had all these people coming to us for demos, and we're saying, rescue me from these, 40-year-old software products. And so we kind of took the bones of this tax resolution thing and then just invested super heavily in R&D to build this thing out and to try to move up market a little bit. So that's kind of what we've been doing, which is really expensive, and you burn a lot of cash doing it, but it's started to pay off. So the fascinating thing to me was the business turned around relatively quickly in terms of we brought churn way down, we started growing again, because for a while we weren't growing, and all of our metrics started to tick up, right? The challenge was, as you mentioned, your biggest job when you're a CEO of a venture-backed startup is to raise money, because you're burning cash every month. And the big challenge was going out in the marketplace and taking these metrics that were starting to look really good, but changing people's minds because they had this perception given like everything that had happened that was like they write you off, right? And you know, you're sort of like the person with a bankruptcy or two. We were not bankrupt, but I'm just using an analogy that like trying to get a loan, right? And venture is such a momentum-driven business that the minute you're kind of off the track, it's really, really hard. And people would take my call because they always love the market opportunity, and I think they were curious, but I didn't get anywhere for a while with them.
So what's that like, being told no?
It reminded me of dating, honestly. It just brought me back to my college days.
All right. It seems like that turned out fine for you, though. Because when you don't want to, when you need a loan, you know, like the blood's met the water, right? And people, whether they're VCs, sophisticated or not, they're like, if you need a loan, where's the dumpster fire?
Right.
Right? So maybe you weren't coming from a position of strength there, but obviously it's worked out. So what are some of the traits that you exhibited in just like overcoming the challenges of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same as almost anything where, you know, so number one, you hear no, and the lizard brain reaction is like anger, right? And fear, right? You're mad at the person for not like doing what you want them to do, and you're afraid that like you're screwed, right? Like, I'm done. Like, we're never going to get to a yes with anyone ever. This company's going to go under, da-da-da-da. And to be clear, I was looking for equity investment, not a loan. Just, that was my analogy. But so, you know, you have that reaction, and you have to fight it, right? And you smile, and you say thank you. And I just use it as an opportunity. When they'd say no, I would just ask them why, you know? And you know, VCs, bless their hearts, a lot of them aren't going to shoot you straight in that regard because they want to keep the option open and they want to be polite and like, you know, we just invested in a company, you know, like, but some of them would level with me and they'd be like, your churn's way too high, you know, or your unit economics don't work, or you're not growing fast enough, or whatever. Or I'm just freaked out because of what happened. And so I got to a set of data that I felt like would help me figure out how to get there. And it was sort of like, okay, if I can like get from A to B on LTV to CAC, and if I can get, you know, from L to N on ARR growth and whatever your metric is, then I can do it, right? And then if I can just get enough time to between, you know, kind of the past and now, then people do it. So I just would smile, I'd thank them, and I would just keep in touch with them. I'd send them the ones I really wanted. I'd send updates, you know, just unsolicited. Probably, you know, put me in spam, but, and built relationships. And, you know, the relationship, the other thing that's super important to mention is we did an internal round twice before we did an external round, which means that our current investors who had already put money in without someone new coming in, which venture investors don't like to do. And so that just came from building really strong relationships with my board and current investors and getting them super bought in. And they were bought in pretty quickly and believing, and then it was just harder to get someone from the outside bought in. So, you know, there's no magical formula. It's just building relationships, building confidence, and figuring out like where you're missing, right? Like, it's kind of like the swing coach thing that we talked a little bit about, of just like figuring out what you're missing and improving it, and then, you know, eventually you can get to a yes.
Yeah. So as you were out soliciting new investors, seems like they were kind of mostly focused on data and meeting certain acronyms and all of that, which is fine. But also you had to know, like, I'm awesome, my team's awesome, why can't you see that, right?
Yeah.
I can dashboard this and spreadsheet that, but like, do you not see the intangibles?
Yeah. That is the most frustrating part because, you know, if you've ever read Peter Thiel's book about 0 to 1, he talks about having a secret, right? And most founders have a secret that they know about the world that nobody else knows. And then they go and prove that secret out in the form of starting a business and succeeding with it. And my secret was this is an incredible market opportunity. Like, I had been at a bunch of different SaaS companies, and I knew what a really good one looked like, and what a mediocre one looked like, and what a bad one looked like. And I knew this was really good. It was a huge market with bad software. So that was kind of my first secret. And then the second secret was the team, right? Like, I didn't walk into a really, bad situation there. I walked into an incredible situation. They'd hired a super talented chief product officer before me named Larry Furr. And then Jordan Ray was our CRO, and was super, been around forever and really talented person. And then we had an amazing head of people in Camille Lewis. And then I was able to hire our head of finance, Allison Fuller from Vivint, and then head of sales, Nate Soph, and a bunch of other people. But like, that team, this was like my fifth SaaS company, and that team was as good or better than anyone I'd worked with. And so between those two secrets, I knew that we could do it, right? It's just, the thing is, it takes a while for the rest of the world to catch up. So it's super frustrating, because you want to like grab people by the lapels and be like, you moron, listen to me. Like, I know this thing that you don't. Just give me your money and I'll make you a lot, right? And I didn't do that, but it gives you that feeling, right? So you just, you have to tell the secret through the data, right? And at a certain point, we were able to do that.
Yeah. So you're getting some wind in your sails with company culture, good communication, and making headway with investment, and obviously like morale, just the general feeling that all people feel is probably going up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it ticked up. I think the second NPS we did was like a quarter later or two, and it was like 35 or something. So, and that was how all of our metrics were, like the culture ones and then the business ones. They just started improving, right? And it's really validating, because you know it's going to happen, but also until it happens, it's still kind of, a question of faith a little bit. And so you see that, and then I think, our attrition stopped, right? People who stuck it out for that first 2 quarters were like, I think they might actually know what they're doing, speaking to the executive team, and I think we might actually pull this off, right? And then, they started referring people, and we'd start hiring a little bit here and there, and NPS ticks up, and all of your metrics tick up. And there was never, for us, I know some companies have this like breakthrough moment where it's just flat and then the hockey stick kicks in. We never had that. It was just like every good thing just started going up, and all the bad things started ticking down. And then it accelerates, but it's just kind of a, day by day, week by week, month by month thing. And then, that resulted in, this really high NPS ultimately, and the fundraise.
Yeah. And so I imagine that core group that kind of stuck it out, that's something they can hang their hat on, right? Like, we stuck it out, and we helped grow this back to where it was and beyond. And so you've had to have made a lot of decisions, right, with product and when to raise, when to not. How do you go about making the tough decisions, right? Because you're ultimately the buck stops with you. What's your internal decision-making process?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that, number one, my decision-making process is, I listen first and foremost, and I can't think of a major decision where someone who reported to me wanted to do a really key strategic thing, and I was like, no, right? There's sometimes a process where I'm like, really? And we converse, and I'm pretty sure every single time they convince me, right? Like, I just believe so firmly in the idea that the people who are closer to the problem and who have the subject matter expertise are the right ones to make the decision. And I think my job is to provide some challenging and some pushback, and kind of put them through their paces. But ultimately, like, and sometimes you can disagree, reasonable minds can disagree, but even in those ones, I sort of feel like you kind of got to default to the person. If it's a product decision, like, your chief product officer needs to make that call ultimately, right? Now, they need to get buy-in from everyone, including me, but, and then on the fundraising thing, which is my deal, right? Like, that's my responsibility. As much as I'd like to say there's this process, like, it's really hard. I liken it to, when you like show up to the movies and you're a little late, and it's like, there's a parking spot at the very far end of the parking lot, and you can take it or you can like gamble and hope maybe somebody left and you can park right next to the building. But if you're wrong, it's going to take you an extra 10 minutes. That's kind of what fundraising is like, right? Like you just don't know exactly when that right moment is and when the market's receptive and when you'll find someone, but you don't want to wait too long either because, if you burn cash, like that can get kind of hairy. So I had actually decided we weren't going to raise this whole year. And then, to a point of internal decision making, I made like a decision. Yeah. And I said, we're not going to do it. I don't think it's right. And then my board actually was like, why don't you just try? And, again, there's that lizard brain reaction of like, because I decided. And, and then I was like, but why? Why wouldn't I? And so I did, and it worked out great. And I'm super stoked. So I think some combination of listening to other people and then making decisions, but treating decisions as hypotheses as opposed to seeing them as this like written in granite because I'm a leader type of thing, I think is pretty important.
Yeah. And so the communication with the boots on the ground is going well. You also have another assignment where you then have to go talk to the board, right? And for a lot of folks, that is a little bit of a gray and black area of like, how do you interact with the board? Do they tell you what to do? Do you just communicate? Yeah. So how do your interactions with your board go?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because so I had executive positions at various SaaS companies prior to Canopy, but I think fundraising and board are the two things that were totally new to me. And so I was a little like, I didn't kind of know what I didn't know. So I actually went and met with a couple CEOs who I respected, and anytime you ask for advice, like you hear all these different things, and I gleaned some value. Some were like, don't tell them anything, you tell them what to do, and other people were more collaborative, and I'm a little more collaborative by nature, so that's kind of where we settled. But I think, and they're all different too, right? Like depending on the kind of investor, like the early stage venture folks, like they care, but they also have like, they sit on 20 boards, right? Later stage, like our new investors, they sit on like 3 boards. So their appetite and ability to engage is greater. So I took the same approach I did with the employees, which is also scary, to be like transparent to a fault. Something bad happens, I call them immediately. I don't wait till a board meeting. We had an outage during tax season that really sucked. I sent an email immediately. And, part of that is just the right thing to do. Part of it is it kind of makes it their problem. It's sort of like we're all in this thing together instead of you're the boss on high judging me. Yeah. And then I just like to build relationships with them too, like on a personal level. Like we talk a lot, sometimes we go to dinner. So everyone's different in that regard, but I just feel like that helps, the interaction.
Yeah. You can get more bees with honey than vinegar, usually. All right, so as you guys look into, this year and what you would like to accomplish, how do you view that as it pertains to products and strategy? Are you guys long-term thinkers, short-term thinkers? Yeah. How do you develop that strategy?
Yeah, so the thing about the way we operate as a small venture-backed company is your product strategy and your general strategy is so tied to your fundraising, right? Because it's just that dictates what you can do and the kind of the period of time in which you can do it, right? And so, which is I think a little unique relative to a public company or even a small company that's, maybe a cash flow positive type of company. So once we kind of got the funding in, that allowed us to kind of finally say, all right, we're going to think in a 3-year time horizon, and this is the level of investment that we can put towards the product. And we have lots of temptations for distraction. We want to, we could go international, or we get pulled into other verticals outside of accounting, and we get leads from there, and let's go to Australia, and all this stuff. But I think we're trying to be very disciplined and saying what we will do, by extension what we won't do. And for us, it's really just doubling down on that practice management software. And then we have another really cool product called Transcripts and Notices that goes well with that. And we've kind of said, who knows what the future holds, but for the next 3 years, we're just dialed in on those products for a certain segment of the market, which is called 5 to 50 person accounting firms in the United States, right? And it just makes it easy to avoid having all those discussions about the other stuff. And so, yeah, that's kind of, now it might change, but at the moment, that's the next 3 years for us as a company.
And that's liberating, right, in life in general, but like as a CEO, all right, there's the roadmap. We're not going to Australia. We're not going to start making tacos. Like, we're going to focus on this. So then you check the bank statement and you've got runway and all of that. But it's pretty frothy out there with like people switching jobs every 2 seconds. How is the last COVID aside, but just like the economics of this economy factored?
Yeah, I mean it's challenging, honestly. Having come up in my professional life, I think in a time where it wasn't like this, right? And it's like I used to get stoked about a 3 to 5% raise. I mean, if you got a 3 to 5% raise, it was like, woo, go home and celebrate, take the family to dinner. And that doesn't cut it now in 2022. So, I mean, I think it's like anything. It's actually a really good test case for this idea of like listening, because you have this emotional reaction. It's like, hey, we gotta like throw a lot of money to get this person to stay, and you have this reaction of like, how dare they, and then you sound like Grandpa Simpson, my day, all that stuff. And then you try to go to the data, right? Which is like, I try to get over that reaction, and then I go to the data, and the data is pretty clear. It's like, oh, wow, salaries everywhere are up. In tech, they're up even more. In Utah Tech, they're up even more. So if we want to be competitive and we want to be a place where awesome people can work, then we got to do it. And so we've done that and been able to retain lots of people. But yeah, we've had some people who've left for more money than we were comfortable giving. And, it's a bummer, and we're sad to see them go. And, it's such a weird time in the world and in the economy that I don't know if that'll change or not, right? But we're just this tiny little ship on this really large economic ocean, and you just kind of have to respond, right? And I think that if you get real dug in on stuff, then you just you could be right, but all your people, you'll be alone. So
you don't want that.
No.
Otherwise, you'll have to do everything.
Exactly. I don't know how to code, so it'd be a problem.
That'd be a problem. All right, I've got one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So you also do some angel seed investments, right? So you're kind of at the same time raising money, running a company, and then interacting with other entrepreneurs and CEOs. How does that help you as a CEO and as a kind of chief fundraiser? What do you enjoy about it, and what do you look for?
Yeah. I mean, I think it helps me because fundraising is just basically telling a story, right? And that's, I think, the thing that I figured out in this last, end of last year, and it took me kind of 2 years, was how do I tell this story? And I tried a bunch of different ways of telling the story that didn't work. And we finally hit on a way to tell the story, and actually I can't even take credit for it. It was our CRO, Jordan Ray's idea, and he just said, you got to tell it this way, split the data this way. And I was like, oh yeah, duh. And it was super effective. And so I think anytime I get to hear someone else tell their story, I learn a little bit, right, from it. And then just selfishly, it's just fun. Like we're 125 people. We're not in that like early, find product market fit kind of thing, and scaling from 5 people to 10 to 20. And so I just like love it. It's super fun, super smart people. My pitch to them is always like, have someone like me on your cap table who, I'm not a venture investor, I run a company. You can call me if you ever find a dead body in the basement, type of thing, and I can help you tell you, what I would do, as opposed to, your board member and investor. So it's been super fun, and I just love this ecosystem, which you guys have done an amazing part in fostering. It's just fun to be a part of an ecosystem and be supportive of those next companies. Like 10 years ago, nobody knew who Lucid was, right? And look at them now. And so it's fun to be at that stage and dream, right? That in 10 years, maybe, NERSA, who I invested in, or Giddy, who I invested in, maybe they'll be Lucid or more, right? So it's just kind of a personal thing that's fun.
Yeah, keeps you sharp.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, we have a microphone in the back. Raise your hand if you've got questions up here in the front.
Well, thank you for coming. Really, I've watched your company for the last few months since I came to Utah, so it's really a pleasure to meet you in person.
Thanks.
My question is, all CEOs are so busy. I don't care if it's small or huge companies, right? And so seeing you come and take a couple hours out of your day to come here, my question is, I don't know how to phrase it. Kind of like, what's in it for you? What are you looking to accomplish
Sure.
by taking 2 very important hours to come and speak to us?
Sure. Well, number one, there was lunch, right? So I love J-Dogs. But yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, your job as the CEO is to tell the company story, right? And you tell it to investors, and you tell it to employees, and then you got to tell it to the public, right? And within the public, I think of everyone as a prospective employee or client, right? At the end of the day, and in this context, it's mostly people who hopefully at some point could come and work at Canopy. And so I think that's, and it's been harder to do that in COVID. I started November of 2019, and then of course COVID hit a couple months later, and so it's been harder to do that. So one of my goals this year is just to get out there more and tell the story. And I've worked for some CEOs who were so good at that, and it makes a real difference. Like I worked at Peak, where Rizwana Bashir is the CEO. I mean, nobody tells the company story in public better than she does, and it's a huge strategic competitive advantage for them. It drives tons of recruiting, it drives tons of fundraising, and she's just good at it and it matters. So I think that's kind of how I justify it.
Hey, so my question is, you talked about finding your story and how you tell it. So my question is, how do you know, okay, I've arrived, this is the perfect way for us to tell our story?
Yeah. So number one, I should say it's probably not this like binary moment where like the angels sing, because it is iterative. Like I have a pitch deck, right? And I tweak it constantly. Every time I show it to someone, I think, ooh, that's like could be better. That's a little different or whatever. But I think most of it is in the reaction that you're getting, right? Where depending on the audience, sometimes you have data, right? So it's like with employees, it's like I have an employee NPS that's going up. So they're reacting well to the story that I'm telling about why working at Canopy makes sense for them. On a fundraising basis, proof's in the pudding, right? Where it's like a term sheet. and so I think now there's smaller data points along the way, right? You can just like, once you're in a fundraising process, you can tell the difference between polite, like denial, like, oh, thank you so much. That's really interesting. Let me talk to my partners. But you're absolutely not going to talk to your partners. You just hit delete on my email and you deleted my email from your contacts, to like, oh, wow. Like, when are you thinking of closing this? And, so you just learn from those cues, depending on the context, if the story is landing or not, right? And so I guess I would say in the long run, proof's in the pudding, because you succeed or not, whatever the metric is. But there's data along the way if you're carefully looking for it around, am I getting there or not, right? And I noticed a gradual thaw from the investors I was speaking with from like January of 2020 to October of 2021, which is when we got our Series BB term sheet. There was just this gradual thaw in how they were reacting to me that was pretty perceptible. So I think it's just, you got to watch for it and look for as much feedback from others in the system and data as you possibly can.
Hey, thank you, Davis. So if you've never done fundraising before, where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, here's what I would say. I think people, and I'm going to threaten my job security here, because it's not, in one sense, it's not as hard and scary and mystical as it sounds. Like, I've talked to people who have really great ideas, and they're just put off because they're intimidated by the thought of raising money. And they're like, I don't know anyone. I didn't go to HBS. I didn't, like I wasn't an intern. I didn't work at one of the handful of companies that everyone knows. And so I would absolutely encourage anyone who's feeling like that to not feel that way, because there is a process you can follow that anyone can follow that you can make you successful at it. Now, obviously, seed stage fundraise is very different from what we were doing as a more established company, but I would just say I've watched tons of people go through that process. I've advised people as they've gone through that process and invested in people as they've gone through that process. And I guess at a high level, I would just say, number one, it's about just being super scrappy and getting in front of people. Like, you're going to email XYZ venture investor, and they're not going to respond. They're not going to respond, and they're not going to respond, and you just got to keep at it. And you find someone on LinkedIn who knows them, or someone who knows them on LinkedIn, or someone who knows them and if you go at that, you'll get in front of them, right? It's just they get 500 emails a day and tons of pitches, and also they're sort of like, look, I get all this inbound, so I'm just going to kind of figure out who wants it the most and who's going to climb to the top of the grease pole a little bit, right? And so, which makes sense, right? So I would say number one is just persistence, and like, don't take no for an answer in terms of getting in front of someone, right? Like, if you get in front of them, they're like no, then temporarily take no for an answer, right? But then, ask, like, why not? And press them for honesty. And then I would just say that the other thing is talk to a bunch of other people. People who reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time around, will you spend a half an hour with me on this? I always say yes. And not everyone does that, but tons of people do that. Like, you'd be surprised by, go look at, there's a bunch of lists on LinkedIn of the 100 companies in Utah that raise money. Go find the CEO of each of them, ping them on LinkedIn, and just say, don't do the lunch thing. I personally, it's like, that's a long time, and you might be weird, so I don't know if I want to do lunch with you, but like, I'll do a 30-minute Zoom call with you for sure. And so just say, and just say, tell me how you did it, have specific questions, and here's what I'm thinking. Send them a deck. I get so much feedback on decks. And then also say, can you introduce me to people? And again, sometimes they'll say no, but anyone who I've seen do that has over time been successful in raising money. And I'm happy to talk to you more about it, but don't be intimidated by it. Keep at it, and then get tons of feedback and ask people for advice and help.
One more?
Thanks for the question. Good to meet you, Davis. I've followed you on LinkedIn for a while. So this is an organizational question. I see that you have a pretty rigorous operational background, and I'm curious your view of operational leadership in a startup to, manage that chaos, especially as you scale from, 20 employees to 100. I see startups that don't invest in the COO role or like a director or VP of operations. I would love your perspective on your views on like centralized operations in a startup and the benefits or pros and cons of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's kind of how I think about it. I think of, like, if you think of a startup like a child, you're not gonna like go to your 1-year-old and demand that they read or, be able to like eat a steak with a fork and knife. And so I think, and I've been at all different stages, right? I've been at companies with 20 people and companies with 1,000 people. And I think it's probably one of the hardest things to get right, because structure, too little and it blows up, and too much it suffocates the flame, right? And so, I don't have an easy answer other than to just think in increments of like a year or two, which is kind of how we do it. And, someone the other day was like, hey, what are you thinking about a COO? We don't have a COO. And it's like, well, I have an operational background. We have super strong executives in the areas that are typically, roll up to a COO, like finance and, HR and those kinds of things. So I was like, I don't see a need for it now. But I've seen other places that did it way too late, and it really costs them, right? Like even companies with crazy product market, maybe even especially companies crazy product market fit, and maybe it's like a founding team that isn't as experienced. In that case, yeah, absolutely. Go find a legit COO who's been there and done that a bunch of times, and who is gonna create some discipline and some structure and some process. So case by case, but take it by stages, I guess. And, don't get there's some people who come in and suffocate it, and you got to stay away from those folks.
Very cool. These were great questions. Congrats, everyone, for really good questions. Thank you so much, Davis. Congrats on the success that you guys have had. It's been fun to watch, and appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.